Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for joining us. I know that we've seen folks from Guyana, from New York, from Canada, from Belize. I've even seen an interest in someone from Finland. I'm not sure if they're Guyanese living in Finland, but I'm assuming that if you are in Finland and you're on, we want to welcome you. The webinar on the strategic considerations for local content requirements in Guyana's oil sector. I'm Terrence Blackman, and I'm the editor of the Guyana Business Journal, and I'm your host this evening. This evening's webinar is a collaboration between the Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium, and it is what we hope will be a first in a series of webinars that explores the issue of local content requirements in Guyana. By way of background, I wanted to note that 3 years ago, my colleague Nigel Killy-Kelly and I had an idea for a magazine whose focus would be on identifying and solving challenges of business formation and business development in Guyana. We were particularly interested in facilitating business formation and development in communities that had traditionally not been a part of the business community. And we were mindful of the way in which the social, political, and legal environment often stifles and stymies legitimate business growth and in particular, frustrates small business operation and growth. Our guiding principles, we wanted to take a look in the mirror. We believe that initial conditions matter and that it was important for us to document and disseminate with clarity and precision what we had inherited. We believed that it was necessary for us to amplify pathways to value addition in our various industries. We noted that the Guyanese sugar industry provides us with an existential example of the need to diversify and innovate or die, and really identified, really importantly, the need to move up the value chain. We embraced unapologetically and argued for good governance. We believe that government and its policy should enable and empower its citizens. And we wanted to adopt a holistic approach. Our focus areas, the global environment, the internal social development, institution building, and the regulatory environment. We hope that this will be a forum for serious and thoughtful discussion on these issues. In this vein, today's webinar today's collaboration with the Caribbean Policy Consortium highlights the work of Professor Jerry Haar of Florida International University. His work, in a sense, sets the context for the discussion of the local content requirements in the Guyanese oil industry. We believe that there is an absolute need for a local content policy in the context of Guyana. We believe that it's important for the Guyanese business community and society to benefit from the opportunities in the sector and to ensure that these opportunities are not completely captured by foreign interests. Local content requirement creates jobs, promotes enterprise, accelerates the transfer of skills and technologies. Local content, therefore, is a strategic issue for the oil and gas industry and for the government of Guyana. And it presents both challenges and opportunities. We believe that a realistic local content strategy can contribute to the stability of the business environment, that it can meet the expectations of the Guyanese government, and at the same time, the oil companies can maximize the opportunities for achieving higher levels of reliability and quality through local supplier proximity, and maximize opportunities for lower costs on some locally procured goods and services over the long run. In Guyana, the overarching question then must be, has there been a comprehensive study to determine the capabilities that exist locally and how these capabilities match up against the lists of goods and services that will be needed for the LISA development and production project? How prepared is the Guyanese private sector to immediately provide specialized goods and services to operators in the industry? For those goods and services which it can supply, are Guyanese companies being given the opportunity to do so? and in the instances where goods and services have to be procured from external sources, are there clearly defined systems that allow for the involvement of the Guyanese private sector? And we also believe that a local content policy must empower. And so are there well-defined processes for widening the circle of access to these business opportunities? Here we think of our empowering women, empowering the indigenous communities in the hinterlands, etc. And so today we begin what we hope will be a thorough examination of these issues, and we're joined by an expert panel. Our moderator today is Dr. David Lewis, and who's an international trade consultant with 30 years of experience in economic policy and business development in the Caribbean and Latin America, in both the public and private sectors. He has degrees from the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business, Brandeis University, and the University of West Indies in Jamaica. Professor Anthony Bryan is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., a senior fellow with the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. He's a founding member of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and has worked as a consultant and a scholar on energy development, energy security, and energy geopolitics in the Caribbean and in the three Guyanas, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana, for various regional governments, national oil companies, and international oil companies for more than 15 years. He has an impressive body of work and publications in those fields. Our keynote speaker is Professor Jerry Haar, Professor of International Business and Executive Director of the Americas, as well as Faculty Advisor for Executive Education in the College of Business at Florida International University. He is a Global Fellow of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and a non-resident Senior Fellow at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. He's held appointments at Wharton, Harvard, Oxford, Stanford, and the American Enterprise Institute, and is a Fulbright Scholar at Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Brazil. A former director of Washington programs for the Council of the Americas, Dr. Haar holds graduate degrees from Johns Hopkins, Columbia, and Harvard. And he has authored 18 books and numerous articles. A consultant to multinational firms, he has appeared in media such as the Wall Street Journal, the Bloomberg Businessweek, the Miami Herald, the Hill, and CNN. Colleagues, I want you to join me in welcoming Professor Jerry Haar to discuss his recently released study of strategic considerations for the local content requirements in Guyana's oil sector. Professor Haar.
Thank you, Terrence. I appreciate this very much. It's a pleasure to be hosted by the Caribbean Policy Consortium and the Guyana Business Journal. And I want to congratulate you on your excellent opening remarks. You really pose all the key questions that need to be addressed, and it's going to take some time to do so. I embarked upon the study with my colleague, Siddharth Upapaye, who is a colleague of mine here at Florida International University. And before sharing the study findings with you, I'd like to make 3 points. Number one, LCPs, local content policies, do not operate in a vacuum. They're here to stay. So the argument is not about do we have them or do we not have them? The question is, what kind of local content policies realistically should we have, can we have? I would want to point out that since the end of the 2008 financial crisis, there have been over 145 new local content requirements worldwide, which one can argue pose many, many challenges, especially for the private sector. For the public sector as well, as they're shaping these policies and need to implement them correctly and be able to monitor the results. Second point I want to make is that Guyana is aware of the opportunities that oil will bring. This black gold is a blessing. It's fabulous. But is Guyana aware of the challenges as well. We see oil on a upward trajectory, but there will be a fall off in demand by 2040, most studies show. And these oil revenues will not be able to cover the budget deficits. So diversification is essential. Saudi Arabia is diversifying their economy rapidly, the United Arab Emirates as well. I was tuning into a webinar the other day, and Finance Minister Singh emphasized this very point. In shorthand, oil cannot be a one-trick pony for Guyana. For the sake of the nation, it needs to focus heavily on that, but diversify at the same time. Third point, before we get into the results of the study, is the business climate. This is essential. Regardless of what one thinks about the World Bank's doing business reports, doing business did cite that Guyana ranks 134 among 190 countries. That's nothing to brag about. It takes 208 days for a construction permit, according to the Doing Business study, 82 days to get electricity, 46 days to register property. Overlay on top of that problems in the country with crime, bureaucracy, the red tape, and the infrastructure challenges. And you can see this is a daunting task to be able to move economic development forward and tying this into oil growth. At the same time, there are many positives that Guyana has, no question about it. And one certainly is the educational level of the people, the skilled workers. But with a caveat, many of the skilled workers that could be attracted to the oil sector are working in transport, agro-processing, and construction. So the question is there going to be enough qualified human capital to address the needs not just of the oil sector, but across the board, a multi-sectoral approach to move the entire diversified nation forward? Now let's turn to the study. We know that the government's goal, to quote, of their local content policies is to, quote, maximize the level, quality, and benefits of participation in the petroleum sector value chain by Guyanese. Who can quibble with that? That's wonderful. That's noble. But in the assessment that I did with Mr. Ubudpaye, we found out that the LCP, local content policy, is a mixed bag. What are some of the positives? Absolutely, preferred access and opportunities for Guyanese, the emphasis on good governance, which Terrence just pointed out, good governance for the LCP to succeed. Also, the need for appropriate legislative support for successful policy implementation and an engagement of the Guyanese diaspora community. Vitally important. But we also identified a number of negatives. That's why I say it's a mixed bag. First, there is an extensive and rigid compendium of local content targets that are questionable in their derivation and exceedingly difficult to attain. In essence, we believe that these targets in LCP, they are a blueprint on how to keep away foreign investors. Guyana's not the only game in town. They've got other choices. They're making those choices. And so one can have very noble policy pronouncements, and who can quibble with those? But when you see what is requirement, and I've been through those extensively, there are big questions that pop up. What are some of our recommendations and the findings? Well, I think, first of all, one, the goals of the government and the foreign companies need not be incompatible. And Terrence was alluding to that as well. All parties need to embrace the 3 C's: communicate, cooperate, and collaborate. Also, and this is vitally important, we really think, my co-author and myself, there needs to be a SWOT analysis of the national economy and identify the human capital needs and competitive capabilities of all sectors. Again, not just oil. And truthfully, I doubt you will find any oil company that would disagree with that. Another recommendation for the oil sector, both the government and the oil companies should increase the short and long-term education and training opportunities, both in country and abroad. Unfortunately, at the higher education or tertiary level, the top career choices of young people I've found do not include management. That's ranked number 5, and engineering, which is ranked number 10. The nation needs managers, engineers, and emphasis should be placed on that. Another point, the services sector can be developed to serve the needs of the extractive industries, but also for other ones, including IT, services, graphic design, and business processing outsourcing. I cannot imagine that oil companies would not prefer to source locally if they can find the level of training, the quality, the reliability, technical proficiency of workforce, which is why human capital development is essential. This will not work without that. Another point, expand investment in infrastructure, roadways, broadband, ports, facilities, along with public services. This is necessary for the government to assure in a transparent, efficient, and effective manner that these infrastructural concerns are addressed. Are there resources? Absolutely, not just locally. You have the Inter-American Development Bank, you've got the World Bank, United Nations agencies. There's no reason that this cannot be ramped up and implemented. Another point, second to the last, the implementation of rigid anti-corruption policies. You have no idea, and I work all over the Americas. Anti-corruption policies, their implementation are essential. It sends the right sign, not just to the foreign investors, but more importantly, the local investment community as well. So the last point, recommendation, and this is the strongest one, the most controversial one, I believe the government of Guyana should discard the current percentage target levels in the Local Content Bill 2021 that I was referring to. Targets need to be derived from an independent source. Let me emphasize that, independent source. We recommend a consortium of 3 consulting firms with no ties whatsoever to the government to evaluate the present capabilities and high priority needs for local personnel and local sourcing, and employ not a 10-year time horizon, but a 5-year time horizon. And the government and the private sector should be working closely together to assist local firms in meeting the technical requirements for oil services and equipment. In a nutshell, that's the report as we see it. We're concerned that a number of these content requirement targets, and some of it was derived excessively from that of the government of Ghana. This does not work all that well. I don't think that either Guyana's content policy, that Ghana's or Nigeria's local content policies are the precise model to follow. Any model developed has to be based upon Guyanese reality. They are the ones to do this. But again, the assessment needs to be done through an independent party. If there were a cricket match between Trinidad and Guyana, for example, I would like the referee not to be from either country, but from Iceland. Anyway, I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. That was a mouthful, and we're going to have to bring David in here to give us some thoughts, and then bring in Professor Anthony Bryan to give us a response to some of what you've raised.
Excellent, gentlemen. Jerry, good morning. Terrence, good morning. Tony, good to see you, and welcome our viewers internationally through all the streaming methods. It's a privilege to be with you this morning and to jointly with the Guyana Business Journal, the Caribbean Policy Consortium, advance on this, what we expect to be the first initiative on energy and oil development issues with Guyana. It's actually our 8th program since last year, but this is our first national program. All of them have been on regional issues, including energy in the Southern Caribbean, with an excellent paper this spring by Professor Tony Bryan, which is on our website. And we hope by next week to have this video and the full report also posted on the website so that the audience can look at it, provide feedback, and use this as a tool for engagement with stakeholders in Guyana and outside of Guyana, public, private, civil society, everybody who's involved, because we do believe that this issue is way too important for the development of Guyana now and into the future to just leave to one sector or one organization. And I think, as Jerry mentioned, in the process of the local content policy strategy led by the government, there has been that outreach and that dialogue, including with the diaspora. And I think that's a very positive component. The idea now was to bring a bit of qualitative and quantitative scrutiny to that, precisely because the government is involved in a current dialogue mode to finalize this strategy into legislation and then set it in place. Two general markers I'd like to point out, and then we can have the comments from Tony and from yourself, Terence. I think it's important that everybody place the situation of Guyana with the oil discoveries and exploration, and now eventually, once projects come on board for gas to energy, for new power structures and so on, within the broader framework of the new growth and attraction of foreign and local investment into Guyana, not only in the energy sector, but beyond. Clearly, the 8,000-pound gorilla in the room is the oil sector, but what's going on in Guyana is fascinating in terms of the massive and diverse growth of business ventures throughout the country in a variety of areas, including local, regional, and international businesses and capital, and the creation of new businesses in Guyana in a variety of sectors, many ancillary to the energy growth, but many in other areas, including such sectors as tourism, as the technology sector, as Jerry mentioned, and many areas in services. One of the key things we point out to people is that energy is not a good. Energy is a service. And as we saw with the experience of Trinidad and Tobago over the past 50 years, there is a curve to go from exploration, production, and eventually trade in the global market to downstreaming in high value area energy services when the exploration component begins to taper down. So I think that's one point that's important. And the second one where I really need to commend the government is the commitment to really start making that effort with regards to the investment ecosystem in Guyana. The Guyana Office for Investment, Go Invest, has been around for almost 30 years. I was part of two teams in 1998 and 2002 doing review and reform of that. And I must confess, in that moment, I remember where the feedback we were getting from people in Guyana was that, well, you know, we need to keep Guyana for Guyanese, and we're not so sure we want foreign investors. And I said, well, that's fine, but why do you consider Trinidadians who are part of CARICOM as foreign investors when we have a common market in the Caribbean and you can benefit from that? We've certainly come a long way from that now, and the government and the people running Go Invest, every other week there are investment missions, new business initiatives in Guyana, and I think that's something to be commended. But again, I think we need to place the energy and oil situation within that broader framework and use it as a leverage for some of those other sectors. As Jerry has pointed out, and many other experts in the oil sector, pick your date, if it's 2040, 2050, 2037, it won't be the same as it is today forever. The energy companies know this, the oil companies know this, they have plans for transitioning. I think it's very important that Guyana have those plans as well, where yes, you have your anchor investor in oil with Exxon and the consortium there, the Stabroek consortium, but you use that to diversify and to leverage capital, technology, human skills, business practices, global benchmarks which these companies can bring to Guyana and use them with the local community, with local businesses, not only to grow those, but also to establish new ones that aren't there in Guyana yet. So I think those 2 points to sort of lay that background and groundwork, because they're going to be issues which are very specific to oil and energy, but I believe there are broader issues regarding the investment climate, business development, and just plain old, good old economic growth and jobs for Guyana. So with that and no further ado, Tony, we've on to you for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then Terrence, yourself for another set, and then we can have a review round with the panelists and then open up to questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, David. Can you hear me now?
No, we can
Yeah.
hear you fine.
Okay. Right. First of all, let me endorse what David just said. We think alike with respect to that. And secondly, let me compliment Jerry on a very fine paper. I've known you for about 25 years, Jerry. This is probably the best that you have done, I'm sorry to say.
Oh, thank you very much. Tony, but I want to tell you, I think you have great potential as well.
All right, great. Now, you're absolutely right about the Icelandic umpire for a cricket team, because the West Indies cricket team is performing so badly, Terrence, as you know. Maybe help from Iceland will do it. So that's a very good suggestion. Okay, first of all, with respect to your paper, Jerry, I think you hit every hot button throughout.
Thank you.
You help by bringing, as they say, reinforcement. Your biggest area of concern, I think, with respect to the actual, the document, is the section on targets, the sort of lack of clarity on the functioning of the regulator. Let me point out to you that a number of these things are being addressed in the MNR's ongoing work on implementation. Okay, I was privy to the 2017 stakeholder, document in which there was a lot of argument raised. David pointed out some of them. Should it be for Guyanese, that sort of thing. So I just want to go over just a little bit of what the stakeholder consultation said at that time. Local content is the sum of the inputs of local goods and services, including employment, provided in oil and gas operations. It is the outcome of companies' hiring and procurement activities. As you know, in economics, you refer to that as backward economic linkages, okay? That's what they stressed in the stakeholder comments at the time. Local pertains to, in the case of individuals, nationals, citizens, and legal residents. In the case of companies, local refers to companies beneficially majority owned by nationals. It is defined in terms of the persons who ultimately benefit from the proceeds of the company. So local content, when the stakeholders looked at the document, it's the same document that's being reworked again. They say local content is only possible when locals, that is individuals and firms, are able to provide goods and services, including employment, to the industry. And that is really the bottom line that they were interested in conveying. And I think that there's a lot of substance there. The point is this. Guyana got it wrong from the very beginning. Okay? I'm going to be very specific about that. Today, as a result of their missteps, and Jerry, I think this might improve some of what you're saying or fortify it, the oil and gas industry is practically owned by foreign companies. The government is unable to keep up with ExxonMobil's breakneck development. It has enlisted several international organizations such as the IMF and the World Bank, as well as law firm consultants and energy strategists to help ready its fiscal, legal, and regulatory systems. Nothing wrong there. One of the focuses, of course, is the local content policy, which holds out a lot of promises. And I think you're absolutely right in telling us what those promises are. Things such as the transfer and use of technology. What the oil companies have done, as you're very well aware, is given generous clarity to Guyanese groups and organizations. These are very admirable sort of measures. And they're positioned, as it were, in the middle of the road in value, as are the signed contracts. They have not, of course, replaced international workers. More than that, agencies such as the World Bank have approved Exxon's affiliates to draft Guyana's laws and policies to regulate ExxonMobil's behavior. The World Bank has funded 2 ExxonMobil affiliates to write Guyana's local content policy and revise the Guyana oil laws. Remember that the APNO AFC administration hired a Houston-based U.S. firm, I think it was called Hunter Andrew Kurt LLP, which has connections with ExxonMobil, essentially placing Guyana's oil interests in the hands of the companies. So this lack of vetting and procurement auditing by the government puts an extra strain on Guyana's fragile environmental policy management, for example. And in fact, it does not bode well. I said to David the other day that pretty soon Guyana is ExxonMobil rather than in the past when British Guyana was in the hands of the sugar companies. You know, this is a sense. Now, none of this is meant to defer foreign interests. It is just a plea for doing something a little bit differently. And the little bit differently is this. Guyana went into this without a national oil company. Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname both had very strong national oil companies. And their process of local content went on over a period of time. For Trinidad, it was 110 years, all right, where you are constantly moving towards a local content policy. Jerry, you are right. It doesn't happen overnight. It can't. It has to be an evolutionary process. The same thing with Suriname. Statsoli is a giant. Statsoli, negotiates all the PSAs and have done that for Suriname for God knows how long. So local content policy is a part of that entire fabric. And it is something that emerges. It is not something that is done overnight. You'll be talking about local content policies till 2040. I think, Gary, you pointed that out admirably. And the negotiation is the critical thing. Now, let me put it to you bluntly as far as Guyana is concerned. They did not realize that the government holds the ace. The ace is the resource. And all your negotiating effort should start with the understanding that you have the resource. It's not that they're going to, dash off to do that is some other place. It's not that Guyana is not the only play in the playbook. No, Guyana is today the most valuable play in the playbook. I mean, the heads of ExxonMobil have said so. Others have said so. So that is the strongest negotiating point for the Guyanese government. And I think they have made a mistake, not realizing that the resource is the key instrument in all of this. Having said that, let me just say 2 things that I think really might help improve your work, Jerry, and the work that we are involved in. One of them is the fact that, when you go on board with a PSA, I will draw reference to something that David sent around this morning, which is the agreement between Shell and Trinidad and Tobago to develop the Manatee resource, which is a cross-border resource that we share with Venezuela. And as part of the terms of the PSC, from the very beginning, the Prime Minister of Trinidad said that Shell is required to comply with the government's local content policy, which requires the contractor to maximize to the satisfaction of the minister the level of usage of local goods and services and employment of nationals. In other words, you hold the company to the grindstone. Now, Shell needs no reminder about that because they have worked with Trinidad for a long, long time. But I think the second point that I wanted to make is that, you said that foreign expertise is always required. Yes, at a certain stage it is. But I want to point out that if you look at the next door neighbor of Trinidad, Trinidad kicked out Texaco, kicked out the British companies. They kicked out all of them at an early stage. They established Petrotrin. Petrotrin has now been succeeded by another company. And they used the resources of LNG to develop LNG trains and also, incidentally, to develop the Point Lisa estate, which, as David points out, is an upstream facility with something like 110 upstream industries that run off of oil. The other part of it is that all electrification in Trinidad and Tobago is from LNG. Now there's a solar plant going in as well. So what I think is that at some point, when you talk about local content and its realization, is the fact that you've gotten rid, as much as possible, of the foreign interests, that you really have developed a local expertise. Now, I mean, Guyana is far, far away from that, okay? And so we look forward to helping them to get there. One final
Only
word.
1 minute.
Okay, good. One final word, Jerry. You have gone down in the last week as an expert. I saw in a lot of the communications on local content. Keep in mind that this can come back to bite you. Okay, I know it's a common practice among academics looking for commercial agreements, engagements, and so on. No disrespect intended at all. I've been through this many, many times. But if you are writing policy, remember that your work will be the one quoted in the future rather than the original from the government's website. And for those of us who have, as it were, been in the industry ever since high school, as in my case, you know that a lot of these reports end up on shelves because of the lack of implementation perspective needed to get the client out of the blocks and running. Okay, you have an excellent chance. You have an excellent chance if you brought the right team along to do that, to make it really relevant. So I offer that to you, my friend, of a quarter century, with great respect. Thank you very much.
And with great respect, I will not respond because I strenuously disagree with you, implying because I'm an academic, I'm also a business consultant, grew up in the family business, worked in it since I was 13 years old. I'm an expert on the Americas. I do know local content, okay? And I'm not in the pocket of either ExxonMobil or the government of Guyana or any other government. I'm freelance. So I don't appreciate the implication that essentially somehow I'm bought, Tony.
Did I ever call the name Jerry Haar as being involved with that? I have said it's a warning to academics. Okay? And I am an academic, so I know what I'm talking about. And I'm sorry, my dear friend, that given
Perhaps,
our
perhaps I misinterpreted your comments, but the point is, I don't let nationalism get in the way of my independence.
I understand that, and I think that when you reflect on what I have said, you will see that it's been offered. It's been offered as a sort of portion, not to you specifically, because I just praised you and told you that you had the opportunity now, or you have the opportunity to really make a difference. I'm sorry you took it that way. You should not have. And if you took it that way, and that's the way it came out from me, it was not intended that way.
Okay.
But
Well,
all right.
we'll have a bit more on the panel dialogue, gentlemen. And obviously, these are issues and differences which come to the forefront. And I think it's actually quite positive as long as we make sure we understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
Terrence, you've got some time of your own to provide some comments on the presentation and the report, and then we will open up for feedback with the panelists and Q&A from the audience, which I know you're tracking.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, Professor Brian. There are two areas that I wanted to kind of put onto the agenda as we walk through this local content journey. And Jerry mentioned the first one in his so, really thinking about exploring strategies through public investment, tax incentives, improved security to bring Guyanese in the diaspora, or at least to sort of incentivize them to engage in invest in the homeland. And I noted to the extent that there was very little of that in the local content schedule. There was no sort of discussion in that regard. And then the second place that I think is very, very important, this is coming from the perspective of someone who's coming from a community that has not been traditionally a part of the business community, is that the question of there is an opportunity, as Professor Brian just noted, for a local content process to begin to think about how you empower those sectors of the society that have not traditionally been a part of the business, and there's sort of elephant in the room in our Guyana context that goes to how are various racial and ethnic communities engage in the sort of business sense. And what I see here is a situation in which the already existing business community will be strengthened by way of these targets. And I don't see something that allows for the widening of the circle of access to the potential benefit of the oil economy. So these were the two things that I wanted to bring again to the floor and to ask Professor Haar whether or not he's given thought in that regard, and also to Professor Brian whether they've given thought in that regard. One, how do you widen this? So, for example, Guyana, the indigenous communities. How do we ensure that the indigenous communities are part of the local content plan? How do we ensure that rural communities are part of them? How do we empower women with the local content plan? On the flip side, there's a skill set that you need, and how do you empower or how do you engage in a meaningful way the skill sets that are extant in the diaspora that can go to mitigating some of the local challenges? So those are the two questions that I wanted to put to both Professor Brian and Professor Haar. One, how do you widen the circle? And two, how do you really engage the diaspora? Or should that not be a part of a content plan?
Good points, Terrence. Thank you. Jerry, off to you for coverage of any of the points raised so far. You've got about 3 to 5 minutes, and then Tony to add something from your perspective as well. And I think one of the key components, just to complement what Terrence was saying, is that for better or for worse, as a result of the history of Guyana in terms of economic development growth, opening up to private sector-driven market forces and the attraction of new investments, is that the institutional capabilities, not only of the government, which Tony mentioned, but of the private sector, of civil society, of academia, of different stakeholders, is something that requires support and investment. And I know that there's discussions already at the University of Guyana on training programs with various regional and international universities. And I think it's a great opportunity in 2022 for Guyana to make a real sort of qualitative jump from the traditional training that dominates the Caribbean of formal 4-year studies in humanities, social sciences, and so on, and to really create a curriculum that is driven to the initiatives that have taken place in the country, where you really need much more like the German model of 18 to 24-month vocational technology training and so on, that will make it relevant for job creation and economic development. So Jerry, on to you, and then Tony. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay. My report, my engagement focused solely on local content, strategies, and policies. So that is at the micro level. My major concern, as I'm sure the major concern is for the government and people of Guyana and the private sector, is overall economic growth and development. Sure, the government and the oil companies can provide scholarships for young people to study petroleum engineering at the University of Calgary or Rice, Texas A&M in Norway. Fine. That is not going to include a lot of indigenous folks. But at the same time, when I take a look at the economy, and I've taken a look at the members of the Chamber of Commerce, for example, there are a lot of services and there are a lot of products being produced that certainly can be targeted at those who are less skilled within the population. For example, one of the members of the Chamber of Commerce is a company called Umami that makes a lot of sauces. I'm very impressed by what I saw there. I want to know, in terms of harvesting, the inputs, the ingredients for that can provide meaningful jobs for those who aren't particularly skilled. And they make great sauces. I've had their hot pepper sauce. Stuffed butter sauce. It's really, really good. Hope you never caught that. Sterling, edible fats. You've got Cummings that makes wood products. The demand for specialized wood products, office furniture and desk and stuff, when you take a look at the entire value chain, you need to see this in light of overall economic development. And if you do, and not just focused on highly technical petroleum focused skill sets, you're able to engage based upon geography, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, an entire spectrum of skins. So I guess the solution here is a sensible overall and engaging economic development strategy. And with the resources necessary coming in from the oil companies to help fund that.
Tony?
Yeah, right. The question that Terence raised initially about the inclusiveness, as you would say, of different communities, indigenous communities, etc. I think that that's accomplished initially with the local content process, obviously with the implementation. I think Jerry hit the nail on the head when he talked about conducting a SWOT analysis of the national economy and skill development. That is where the answer lies, because that is when you will have a chance to really look at human and business capacity development. You will have a chance to look at employment and procurement, and you would have a chance to look at oversight, governance framework to ensure that benefits are realized. That's how you're going to bring those groups into it. In those three areas there. The second question that you raised is one of encouraging the diaspora. Okay, now I don't see that is an issue. It has to do with, what are you offering? how can you attract people from abroad? My own country of Trinidad, pulls a lot of people from abroad. And the thing is, they offer very high salaries. They offer working conditions. It's an oil economy. It's 110 years old. It can do this. Guyana may not be in a specific shape to do that, but that's how you answer that one. And something I wanted to mention, to go with Jerry's last remarks about, I saw it in the paper, University of Calgary, University of Alberta, University of Texas at Austin, Texas A&M, all of them first-rate places. However, what about UWI and its petroleum unit? What about the University of Guyana and its new petroleum unit? What about Suriname and Statsoli, which has done to this local policy before? What about the people in Petrobras? What about the people in Pemex? I mean, there are a lot of training facilities that have a developing world perspective, I think, which is what you need, as opposed to Manitoba, Texas, and Texas A&M. And those are the things, Jerry. If those institutions were mentioned in your paper, I think it could enhance it quite a bit.
Well, it was probably a sin of omission, not of commission. Certainly, we could definitely include the others as well. It's just that was what came to the top of my mind, top of mind. That's all.
No, I understand that. But, you and I are coming at this from different perspectives, obviously. Okay. First world, third world, whatever the hell it is, they call it these days, a developed nation, developing nation. I tend to think that we have created our own institutions. I mean, the UWI Petroleum Unit, one of our CPC members is there, David, Lawrence Sobers, others, Andrew Jupiter. I mean, these are first-class people. And you have that sort of thing going on there. Guyana is building one. As I say, Statsoli and Suriname. I mean, they have a sort of a training division that is very useful. Sorry.
Just coincidentally, Tony, on Wednesday, 2 days ago, the Trinidad and Tobago Energy Chamber had its session on local content policy in Trinidad and Tobago, a 100-year plus industry. So this is an ongoing process, I think, is the point. For better or for worse, Guyana is just starting the race. Terrence, I'd like to pass this on to you. I know you've been getting some questions, but I'd also like you to, if you want, contribute something. You are the Guyanese on this panel. You know your country better than all of us, despite the work we've done and so on. I'm interested in a few comments from you for the audience on your view as a Guyanese American in terms of how can we leverage this initiative, not only in the oil and energy sector with the oil companies and local content, but beyond that, as I mentioned in the beginning, to really hunker down on the expansion and development of management skills in Guyana across the board. We've mentioned the public sector, the regulatory role, but there's a role with the private sector, with civil society, and so on. Because if indeed Guyana as an entity is going to be a complement to the role of foreign investment, it's going to need that strengthening of management skills and roles to be able to engage that. And I'm personally interested in your comments on that, and then of course the Q&A with our audience online. Thank you.
So my immediate comment. So I think the strength of Guyana, and I think Jerry captured that, is that Guyana its strength is in its human capital. What one finds across the globe, just the folks who are looking at our program now, or from all across the world. And so what one finds is that Guyanese play significant roles in institutions all across the world. So I have great faith in the capacity of Guyanese to meet this challenge at this moment. I think where I worry is that the institutions, the Guyanese institutions, don't seem to be able to fully hold on to the path that is necessary in order to do this. And I hope that these opportunities will be strengthened. You know, just Professor Bryan just noted the University of Guyana, a wonderful institution, and I think that and its leadership is actually doing a really good job in terms of moving in the direction of strengthening the infrastructure necessary to prepare folks to participate in the new oil economy. But I would want to not have Guyanese put all of their eggs in the oil basket. You know, I visited Trinidad and Tobago many times, or a few times, and part of what I see there is certainly in the late 1980s, this was a far wealthier Caribbean society than others. But I think today we see, in a sense, the effects of not having widespread, not devolving across the spectrum, the opportunities of the oil economy, and this is the place where I hope Guyana does not miss. This is the opportunity I hope Guyana does not miss. We are not going to be able to function effectively as a society with a small oligarchy and a much larger. And this is where I think these institutions like the University of Guyana and others, and this is one place where I think one should commend the current government in terms of, and Jerry talks about this in the 20,000 online scholarships for folks to prepare for the energy sector. I would wish that would be more targeted, but I certainly think that this is one very, very, very positive sign.
Yeah, David, might I just comment on something there a minute? Terence, yes, you made note of the fact that there is an overdependence in Trinidad on the oil economy. Okay, now it doesn't employ many people, but the point is, the way it has happened is that the wealth, the largesse of oil wealth, is dispensed in very specific ways. Free healthcare, free education through university, subsidized transportation, infrastructure. In other words, the wealth is disseminated in a very public way through specific agencies. And that is one of the things that Guyana has to consider. That, you know, you got to maybe have free education, you have to have, you know, free healthcare, you have to have a number of things that, you know, maybe some of our friends would say, well, Trinidad is a socialist society or something like that. Far from it. It's an extremely capitalist society, but it has dispensed the wealth in specific ways. I just wanted to bring that point up. Thank you.
Thanks. Gentlefolks, this discussion needs to happen many more times. We're fast approaching the hour. I thought we'd have a moment to sort of do wrap ups and so on. But I know there's a question from someone in the audience. Great panel. What country's local content policy should Guyana model?
Okay. Terence, that question was from Arthur Deacon of America's Market Intelligence. Arthur Deacon is one of the top experts in this area. So him posing the question, what country's local content policy should Guyana model? It's like Beyonce saying, hey, where should I go for singing lessons? Arthur's the expert. I think that you ought to query him on what he thinks the best model is.
Yeah, we'll certainly do. Here is something that has popped up in the thread. So this to the question about it's a question about diaspora engagement, and so this is one for Professor Bryan. Did Trinidad have any specific diaspora engagement initiatives that were targeted part of the government policy? You know, there seems to be in Guyana and outside of Guyana. Is there a need? If the diaspora wants to invest, they can invest just like everyone else. Why do we need to do something special? So I'm wondering, historically, was it the case in Trinidad and Tobago that there was something explicit around the diaspora, or diasporans just simply came?
No, there was nothing specific. In fact, one of the obvious points is that after 110 years, or maybe 100 as an oil economy, you were actually producing a surplus of talent that you were exporting. You know, Trinidadians were going overseas. They were going to Saudi Arabia. They were going to every part of the world where there was an oil rig. So we were in the opposite position of exporting people, you know, sending people into the diaspora, as it were. People who came, they came because they had specific talents. They were willing to exchange positions abroad for equivalent positions in Trinidad and Tobago. And the companies in Trinidad did not fail them. They met their salary requirements, their health requirements, their travel requirements. Very, very generous deeds in times. I think one of our colleagues, David, Robert Riley, who came back as, you know, head of Shell and so on. These guys were, they wanted to come home and they were attracted. It was made attractive for them to come home. And that's the case.
So the other question is around education, and you know, someone noticed that, you know, certainly UE, UTT, UG, etc., petroleum and geoscience programs. I take the following tack. So I wrote recently about the deep sea drilling that is there any capacity in our universities to do the kind of modeling, to do the kind of thing that is necessary in order to drill beneath the Atlantic Ocean in the way that we're currently doing this now? And isn't there a place for us to learn, for our institutions to get better, and perhaps for us to have these linkages with institutions outside of the Caribbean?
You know, there probably is. The point is that the engagement, let us say, with respect to the future of oil and gas in the blue economy, right? Now that's one that's very much on the top of the agenda. Can that coexist? I would refer you to a chapter in a recent book on the blue economy, which I contributed, which says it can. The oil and gas can. The deep sea can go on with caution, with an understanding that certain safeguards have to be built in with respect to spills, with respect to all of that. Now, this is not necessarily something that foreigners bring to us. This is something that is the result, as I say, of having an industry for that length of time, that we understand what is at stake and we take measures to cover. We have, in Trinidad, we have one of the Nobel laureates dealing with, you know, that future of environment and shores and so on, by Professor John Agard. Most of you may know him. You know, a Nobel laureate. I mean, he and I have co-authored several things in recent times, which are not for public distribution. We both had to sign NDAs. But the point is that these are things that are well considered. Well considered. They're not fly-by-night arrangements. Where foreign expertise is necessary, it's brought in and it's engaged. Where transfer of technology is necessary, it's brought in and it's engaged. Okay, it is a process.
Yeah, I note the comment by Mohammed Karamola that Trinidad and Tobago did not, in a sense, need to reach out to its diaspora, as unlike Guyana, it had a legacy of oil and gas participation locally, and it never really had the sort of hemorrhaging of human capital that Guyana has experienced.
Right. And as I mentioned, across the board, I think, you know, the context of Guyana and both, you know, walking and dancing and jumping at the same time, because it's not just the oil sector. It's really a recent decade, 2 decades of the opening up of a private sector-led market economy after 50 years of being closed. So it's not just in the energy sector. And I think that we're you know, in a kind of strange way, were it not for that serendipity of the oil exploration, one wonders to what degree this kind of business enhancement dialogue would be taking place in Guyana, precisely because none of those sectors on their own can drive that growth immediately the way this oil exploration can.
Point taken, David.
Terrence, I think the larger question is, if you were to run a series of focus groups for a second with the diaspora community, ask the question, under what terms and conditions would you return either full-time or part-time? What kind of investments would you be willing to make? What do you need in terms of the government, whether it's going to be public safety, whatever it is? What is it going to take for you to come back? That is where it should be determined, not by individual business consultants or academics. Talk to the people. Would you be willing to come back? And who would be willing to come back? A Guyanese expatriate that's been here, say, in the United States for 3 generations, he says, no, I'm going to miss my grandkids. But what about somebody who's moved, say, to New York City from Georgetown maybe 4 or 5 years ago? They don't have that family legacy conditions where it's really, really going to be hard to go back. I think it would be interesting to conduct such a study of focus groups.
Jerry, you raised something about that in your paper, incidentally, talking about, West Indians like myself and maybe David and so on who move back and forth, very easily. You're in Trinidad, you're in, that happens in my family. I'm sure some of it happens in David's family. I don't know about Terrence, but it's a back and forth. It's a productive gesture on both parts.
Well, it's the multinationality of business today. Terrence, before we close, I'm not sure how much time you have on
our time.
Well, I just wanted to add one anecdote which I find is always useful in these initiatives, and is actually relevant to Guyana. Today's #1 per capita exporter of high-tech technology, digital products, and so on, 40 years ago, basically exported bananas, coffee, cocoa, and no value-added agricultural products. They transformed in the mid-1990s by beating a global procurement bid to host Intel's microchip production, and beat Ireland, beat Singapore, beat Malaysia, and beat Puerto Rico, which is where Intel was before and is a manufacturing powerhouse as part of the US. And the one single reason they were able to get Intel into Costa Rica is the government of Costa Rica and Intel were able to reach an agreement where Intel was going to be able to invest and collaborate and help develop the new curriculum of Costa Rican engineers for the future industry, for the industry of the future. And that's how Costa Rica transformed from #1 exporter of bananas, coffee, cocoa, and so on, to now #1 exporter per capita. And it's actually also the #1 per capita in the world of software developers and apps per capita, but basically individuals who now have these skills and with a little machine, little computer in their hand, are developing new technologies and selling them in the global market. The investment in that human resource skill that Jerry has mentioned, I think there's a great opportunity with this major company, which is not just an oil company. It has many other areas, and it's a good example for others. And one of the issues, I think, and a challenge and opportunity for Guyana, not just the government, but the business community, the civil society, and so on, is how do you maximize the presence of a major global player like Exxon beyond just drilling and exploring and getting oil out of the ground? There's a lot of value there. I think that's something to be done.
And David, if I might add, in our own country, remember the story of Atlantic LNG,
Yep.
right? Attracted to build 4 LNG trains at a time when LNG was not a good word.
Right.
And that skyrocketed Trinidad to the top of LNG producers in this world. Today we export to 25 countries, as you know, and that is a case of value added in a way in which you never saw it before. And in the case of Costa Rica, my God, God bless them. They have really done a trip. You know, good.
Terrence. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you're running out of
know
time.
this I mean, we have to do this again. This
Yeah, sure.
conversation
If I may. Okay. All being said, when I, as a foreigner outsider looking in, I see Guyana has far more assets than liabilities. We were only talking about local content policy in the oil industry. But from what I have seen already and talking to many, many people, which I have as part of the study, the potential in business processing outsourcing, software design, agribusiness, tourism, renewable energy, and you have other players. You have got a small business bureau, a center for local business development. It's not just the government and not just the oil company.
Yep.
So the array of assets to develop and move the ball forward, including underserved populations, as I mentioned, is enormous. The question is there a will and the commitment on the part of the public and private and NGO sectors to work together to move the ball across the finish line?
Yeah, I think that's an apt place for us to maybe close this part of close this part of the conversation, and I hope that we will have an opportunity to do this. We will have an opportunity to do this in the near future, and I just wanted to say thank you to each of you for participating in this. I wanted to say thank you to the audience for joining in and for posing excellent questions. And I wanted to say thank you to Andy Chichester, who's my StreamYard consultant, and who's the guy who sort of led me on this journey. And I know you guys are maybe Zoomers, and I hope today that I gave you something new in the StreamYard context. And I think that's it. I just want to thank you all again for coming, and thank you for the wonderful work that you've done here, Jerry. And I'm going to post this on our website, and I hope that our colleagues in Guyana and abroad can be informed by the discussion that we've had here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terrence. Congratulations, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Okay, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
How do I get this off?
Just